Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right into a truly fascinating chapter of human history. Over the next few minutes, we're going on a structured journey through the massive, dramatic cultural shifts that completely transformed Europe between the 14th and 17th centuries. We are talking about an era where towns exploded in size, human potential was completely redefined, and the known world literally expanded. It's an incredible story of rebirth, and I am absolutely thrilled to unpack it with you.
So, here is our roadmap. We'll start with the rise of city-states, move into humanism and new learning, explore science and Arab contributions, then look at art, architecture, and realism, before finishing the whole thing up with the printing press revolution.
All right, let's kick things off with Part 1, the rise of city-states, geography and economy.
You know, you might assume that a politically fractured country would be a weak one, right? But with Italy, it was the exact opposite. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Italy had absolutely no single unified government. It was physically and politically fragmented into independent city-states like Florence and Venice. And actually, instead of being a weakness, that fragmentation fueled intense local competition and became the perfect launchpad for a massive cultural revival. Towns started acting like fierce independent republics, instead of just subjects of a massive distant empire.
So why did this spark ignite in Italy specifically? Well, without powerful feudal lords or a dominant centralized pope holding everything back, urban commerce just skyrocketed. Thanks to booming trade with the Byzantine Empire, Islamic countries, and the Mongol open Silk Route to China, Italian coastal cities became unimaginably wealthy. Suddenly, these cities were being run by rich merchants and bankers who were incredibly active in civic life. And here's the catch. To manage all this new wealth, they desperately needed a totally new type of educated citizen.
That growing need leads us right into Part 2, Humanism and New Learning, the mindset shift.
All this booming trade required highly skilled lawyers, notaries, and record keepers, and meeting that demand triggered a radical shift in how people thought about education. Enter humanism. Now, humanism essentially moved the focus away from the church and pointed it directly at the capabilities of the individual. In the early 15th century, universities like Padua and Bologna began to change. Scholars like Francesco Petrarch argued that to truly understand civilization, you couldn't just study law for trade, you had to study ancient Greek and Roman culture. For the first time, they were heavily emphasizing subjects that had absolutely nothing to do with religion, focusing instead on debate, pure discussion, and individual thought.
To really grasp this mindset, listen to what the Florentine humanist Pico della Mirandola wrote in 1486. For just as bodily energy is strengthened by gymnastic exercise, so, beyond doubt in this wrestling place of letters, as it were, energy of mind becomes far stronger and more vigorous. Think about that for a second. He's comparing intellectual debate to going to the gym. These thinkers genuinely believed that man was entirely capable of making his own decisions. The mind was a muscle, and it needed to wrestle with complex secular ideas to bulk up.
And honestly, these humanists had some serious confidence. They essentially rebranded the previous 1,000 years of history just to make themselves look better. Because they felt they were the ones restoring true civilization after the fall of Rome, they completely dismissed the entire era of church-controlled thinking as the Middle Ages, or even the Dark Ages. In their own time, from the 15th century onward, they boldly declared that the modern age. Now, modern historians don't really use the term Dark Ages anymore because it's pretty unfair to the people who lived then, but it tells you exactly how highly these Renaissance thinkers thought of their own cultural explosion.
But here's the thing. The Italians didn't discover all this ancient knowledge on their own. Let's look at Part 3, Science and Arab Contributions, the Catalyst.
This is a massive, massive detail that often gets overlooked. Arab and Persian scholars painstakingly preserved, translated, and studied ancient texts for centuries, serving as the absolute vital bridge for European science, medicine, and philosophy. When European scholars sat down to read Plato or Aristotle, they were very often reading translations provided by Arab scholars. Brilliant minds like Ibn Sina in medicine, Al-Razi with his comprehensive medical encyclopedias, and Ibn Rushd in philosophy were deeply, deeply respected in the Italian world. They didn't just hand over old books, they injected advanced natural science, mathematics, and astronomy right into the intellectual fire of the Renaissance.
And all that abstract thought, it very quickly took physical shape. Moving on to Part 4, Art, Architecture, and Realism, the physical manifestation.
This highly individualistic mindset directly fueled an astonishing explosion of creativity. Just picture the sheer contrast of what was being produced. On one hand, you have the incredible, intimate anatomical realism of Albrecht Dürer's praying hands, a true testament to the confidence artists had in capturing human perfection. And on the other, you have monumental, skyscraping classical revivals like Brunelleschi's spectacular Duomo in Florence. Formal education in a classroom wasn't the only way humanism spread. This art and architecture broadcasted these new, secular ideas out into the open for everyone to see.
What really drove this era of art was a relentless pursuit of realism. These artists weren't just painting, they were practically operating as scientists. I mean, artists were literally studying inside medical laboratories. A professor of medicine named Andreas Vesalius was the first to properly dissect the human body, and artists paid incredibly close attention just to understand the bone structures beneath the skin. Painters used complex geometry to finally nail 3D perspective. They adopted oil paints to achieve far richer colors. Architects literally dug up ancient Roman ruins to study perfectly proportioned classical styles. This was the era of the scholar artist.
And think about the sheer speed of this innovation across the 15th and early 16th centuries. Masterpiece after masterpiece completely redefined human capability in a remarkably short window of time. Brunelleschi's Duomo in 1436, Da Vinci painting The Last Supper in 1495, Michelangelo finishing the Sistine Chapel ceiling by 1512. It was this compounding, undeniable wave of creativity where, for the first time, artists became incredibly famous as individuals, celebrated by their actual names, rather than just being anonymous guild members.
Which brings us to our final piece of the puzzle. Part 5, the printing press revolution, the global wave.
We've explored the art and the mindset, but to turn this isolated Italian spark into a global phenomenon, Europe needed tech. And we absolutely have to remember that this European revolution relied heavily on technologies imported from outside of Europe. If you wanted to see Italian art, sure, you had to travel to Italy. But for the written word to spread humanist ideas across borders, Europe needed the printing press. And they were indebted to the Chinese for printing technology, which European traders and diplomats learned about during visits to Mongol courts, arriving right alongside other game changers like firearms, the compass, and the abacus.
150. Why does that number matter? Well, that is exactly how many copies of the Bible Johannes Gutenberg printed in his workshop in 1455. The reason 150 is such a massive deal is that it took Gutenberg the exact same amount of time to print those 150 copies as it used to take a single dedicated monk to handwrite just one single copy. Suddenly, classical texts, humanist essays, and cutting-edge scientific discoveries could be reproduced rapidly and distributed across distant towns and countries. It was an absolute game-changer.
That massive leap in information sharing truly changed the world forever. So as we wrap up this explainer on a revolutionary chapter of history, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. If the printing press was the technological spark that democratized information and caused a cultural revolution in the 16th century, what is our modern equivalent today? How is technology continuing to shape human rebirth and the spread of ideas in our own time? It's something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the Renaissance, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.